I was the kind of woman who never expected betrayal to come dressed in silk ties and designer smiles, yet there I was, standing at the entrance of a private dining hall with my heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. My name is Alyssa Monroe, 32 years old, a marketing consultant by trade, and the supposed black sheep of a family that never missed a chance to remind me how ungrateful, unambitious, and unwanted I was. But that night, the night they invited me to dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, I had no idea they were planning to humiliate me in front of strangers, just to feed their own vanity. I remember staring at the glittering chandeliers above, the soft murmur of violin music in the background, and that familiar wave of unease curling inside my stomach. Something felt off. My parents rarely invited me anywhere unless there was an audience to witness my downfall. Still, I went, because some part of me, foolishly, naively, wanted to believe they were finally ready to treat me like family. The host led me to the table, and there they were, my parents, my brother Evan, and his fiancée Harper, all dressed to perfection. My mother's pearls gleamed like sharp little teeth around her neck, and my father's smile was the kind that made you want to run, not relax. "Alyssa, darling," my mother cooed, her voice dripping with that fake warmth she reserved for people she looked down on. "So glad you could make it. We thought you'd be too busy." The word busy came out as a sneer. I sat down, forcing a polite smile, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the menu. The waiter poured wine, and before I could take a sip, my father cleared his throat dramatically. "Let's toast," he said, raising his glass. "To family and to new beginnings." Everyone clinked glasses, and I tried to follow suit, unaware that the new beginning he was referring to would be the end of whatever thin thread of dignity I had left. They started talking about money, inheritance, business shares, things they always discussed as if I weren't sitting right there. My father owned a chain of luxury dealerships. My brother was set to take over soon. I was the one who had left the family business years ago, choosing to start my own marketing agency, something they had mocked as playing with crayons. So when my mother smiled sweetly and said, "We wanted you here tonight for a reason," I already felt that cold knot of dread tightening. "Evan's getting the estate," my father said plainly, like he was reading a weather report. "And the trust fund, too. We've decided to remove you from the inheritance. You don't need it. You've made your own choices." My stomach dropped. I froze mid-breath, the sound of the restaurant fading to a faint buzz. They hadn't invited me to dinner to celebrate anything. They'd done it to announce my removal from the family legacy. And worse, they wanted witnesses. The next few minutes played out like a slow-motion nightmare. My brother leaned back, his arm around Harper as if he'd just won a trophy. "It's only fair," he said with a smirk. "You left the family years ago. Why should you get a penny?" Laughter echoed around the table, sharp and cruel. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but every word stuck in my throat. My father continued, "We wanted to tell you here in person. It's time you understand that independence has consequences." His words sliced deeper than he knew. For years I'd worked hard, built my company from scratch, struggled to pay rent, while they sat in their mansion pretending my absence didn't exist. And now, when I'd finally found peace, they dragged me back into their world just to cut me out in front of people who barely knew me. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know what I'd built behind the scenes. They didn't know that while they laughed at my little agency, I'd landed international clients, that I was no longer the struggling dropout they remembered. They thought I was still the naive girl they could humiliate. So I smiled. I looked at my father, my brother, my mother with a calmness they didn't recognize. "Thank you for letting me know," I said softly. "This will make things easier." They mistook my quiet tone for defeat. They didn't see the fire lighting behind my eyes, the plan forming that would make this dinner the biggest mistake of their lives. The next morning, I woke up with the bitter taste of last night still in my mouth. It wasn't just humiliation that kept replaying in my head, it was the smugness on their faces, the way they enjoyed watching me crumble in silence. I stood before the mirror in my small apartment, my reflection cold and still, my eyes rimmed with shadows of disbelief. I'd thought I'd grown immune to their cruelty, But last night had been different. It wasn't rejection anymore, it was erasure. They didn't just want me out of their wealth, they wanted me forgotten. But as I looked at my reflection, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to cry, I wasn't going to beg, and I sure as hell wasn't going to disappear.
No.
If they wanted to see what independence truly looked like, I was going to show them. They wanted me gone from their legacy. I would build my own empire that would eclipse theirs so completely they'd have to squint just to see my shadow. The next few weeks were quiet, deceptively so. I didn't reach out, didn't argue, didn't post anything online. Silence, I've learned, unnerves the arrogant. It makes them wonder what you're planning, and I was planning. I spent days buried in my office, surrounded by blueprints, data charts, and contracts. My agency, which they believed to be small, had been in negotiations with a global luxury brand. Ironically, the same one that supplied exclusive cars to my father's dealerships. It wasn't easy getting here. I'd fought through sleepless nights, endless rejections, and the kind of loneliness that eats at your soul. But for the first time, I saw all those struggles not as scars, but as weapons. My pain had trained me better than their privilege ever could. By the end of that month, I finalized a deal that would make my agency the sole global marketing partner for that luxury brand, effectively replacing my father's outdated, overpriced marketing division. The irony was delicious. Still, revenge wasn't about money for me. It was about respect, about reclaiming the dignity they'd tried to strip from me in that restaurant. I kept it all quiet, no announcements, no press. I wanted them to find out the way I had, publicly. Then came the opportunity. My father's dealership hosted an annual gala every spring, an event covered by local news and attended by every rich name in the city. The invitations went out as usual, and though I hadn't been invited in years, this time I decided I'd attend, but not as Alyssa, the forgotten daughter. I'd arrive as Alyssa Monroe, CEO of Monroe Creative Strategies, the new face behind the rebranded international campaign that had just pushed their rival dealerships into bankruptcy. When the night came, I walked into that ballroom wearing a sleek black dress that shimmered under the lights. Not expensive, but elegant, powerful. The cameras flashed as I entered. The whispers began almost immediately. People who once dismissed me as a failure now leaned in to get a better look. My brother's fiancée was the first to spot me. Her face paled. She whispered something to Evan, who turned, his smile faltering when he saw me walking straight toward their table. My father's expression was priceless, confusion mixed with a flicker of panic. My mother, ever the actress, pasted on a tight smile. "Alyssa, what a surprise," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I smiled politely and leaned in. "I came to congratulate you," I said, "on the partnership. It's impressive that you're now clients of my company." The silence that followed could have shattered glass. I handed my father a business card, embossed with my agency's name and my signature. He stared at it, his jaw tightening as realization dawned. The brand he'd been bragging about all evening, the one his company had just signed an exclusive promotion deal with, was now represented by me. His own daughter. The same one he'd called a mistake. For the rest of the evening, I didn't need to say another word. My presence alone was a living reminder of everything they'd underestimated. Reporters approached me for interviews, influencers asked for collaborations, and investors wanted meetings. My father sat silently, his face drained of color, while my mother sipped her wine in forced composure. Evan avoided my eyes entirely. I could have humiliated them right there, announced to the entire crowd what they'd done, but I didn't. True revenge doesn't need noise. It thrives in silence. When I left the gala, flashes followed me to the door, and I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't healed me, but it had balanced the scales. I didn't just want them to hurt. I wanted them to see who I had become without them. That night, as I drove home, I didn't feel victorious or angry, just free. For the first time in my life, I was no longer the outcast, the disappointment, or the daughter who didn't belong. I was the woman they could never control again. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind kept replaying the look on their faces, that frozen mix of disbelief and regret. For years, I had begged for their approval, molded myself into what they wanted, obedient, quiet, humble. But now, watching my father's empire silently crumble from decisions I hadn't even intended as revenge, I realized how poetic life could be. Karma doesn't scream. It whispers softly as it rearranges the pieces of your fate right before their eyes. The morning after the gala, I woke up to hundreds of notifications on my phone, messages from journalists, business offers, even old friends who had once ghosted me. Among them, one text stood out. It was from my brother. "You've made your point. Don't ruin us." Just 5 words, but enough to make me smile. They still didn't get it. This wasn't about ruin. This was about balance. I ignored the message. Instead, I went into the office early. My assistant, Carla, greeted me with her usual wide-eyed enthusiasm. "You're trending, boss," she said, flipping her laptop around to show me an article titled, "A Strange Daughter Behind Major Brand Takeover." The comments were brutal, not toward me but toward them. People had pieced together the family link. The public loved a redemption story, especially one where the underdog came out on top. I scrolled through the comments, heart pounding as strangers defended me, praising my resilience. For years, my family had owned the narrative. I was the black sheep, the disappointment. But now, for the first time, my voice was the one echoing across the world. And I wasn't done yet. That week, I began phase 2 of what I privately called Operation Closure. I bought shares quietly, small ones, under aliases in the very companies my father's group depended on. Real estate, logistics, marketing. One by one, I secured influence where it hurt most. I didn't want to destroy him financially. I wanted to dismantle his arrogance. My plan was patience itself, every step designed to make him realize how fragile power is when built on cruelty. Within 3 months, my team had strategically absorbed nearly a third of his partnerships. His empire wasn't collapsing, it was evolving into mine. The sweetest part? He still had no idea. He thought bad market conditions were to blame, but revenge isn't without its ghosts. One evening, as I sat in my office overlooking the city lights, I received a call from my mother. Her voice, delicate as ever, trembled as she spoke. "Your father isn't well, Alyssa," she said. "He's been under a lot of stress. Can we meet?" For a long time, I said nothing. My heart battled with itself, one side craving vindication, the other aching from old memories of a girl who once just wanted her parents' love. I finally agreed, but on my terms. The meeting was set at my company's headquarters, not theirs. I wanted them to step into my world this time. When they arrived, they looked smaller somehow, diminished not in wealth, but in certainty. My father's confident stride was gone, replaced by hesitation. My mother clutched her purse like it was armor. "Alyssa," my father began, "this situation, it's gotten out of hand. The press is spinning stories, and our partners are nervous." He paused, swallowing his pride. "You've proven yourself, I'll admit that. But let's end this before it destroys what's left." His words carried the same superiority, the same tone of negotiation he used on business rivals, not daughters. I leaned back, folding my arms. "I didn't start a war, Father. You did, when you made me believe I wasn't worthy of your name." He flinched slightly, but tried to recover. "That's not what we meant. You have to understand." I cut him off. "No, I understand perfectly. You built an empire on control, and when you couldn't control me, you erased me. But here's the difference. I built mine on purpose, not power. That's why yours is crumbling and mine is thriving." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Alyssa, please. You've made your point. Don't destroy your father." Her words hit harder than I expected. I stared at them, these two people who had shaped me with rejection and expectation, and for the first time, I didn't feel hate. I felt clarity. They had given me the greatest gift without realizing it, the will to rise on my own, and I told them I wasn't out to ruin them. "I just want you to see me," I said quietly. "Not as your disappointment, but as your equal." There was a long silence. My father looked down, his voice softer than I'd ever heard. "You've become more than I imagined," he said. But it didn't have to be this way. I smiled faintly. You're right. It didn't. I could have stopped there, walked away, ended the story on redemption. But revenge stories don't always end in peace. Sometimes, they end in realization. And as they left my office, I handed them a folder, documents proving my ownership in several of their key assets. I didn't say a word, just watched the shock unfold on their faces. Later that night, as I sat alone with a glass of wine, the city lights reflecting in the glass, I wondered if I'd gone too far. But then I remembered that dinner. The humiliation, the laughter, the taste of betrayal. No, I hadn't gone too far. I'd simply finished what they started. And for those watching, have you ever been underestimated so badly that you wanted to rewrite your story just to prove them wrong? Tell me in the comments where you're from and what you'd rate this revenge, because what happened next was the twist I never saw coming. The following week began with rain, the kind that feels like the world washing itself clean, though I wasn't sure if I deserved that kind of mercy yet. I had won, on paper at least. My name was everywhere. Headlines called me the daughter who outsmarted a dynasty. But what no one saw was the quiet that came after revenge, the emptiness that creeps in once the fire runs out of fuel. I sat by my window, coffee in hand, watching the storm roll over the skyline when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my brother, Mark. We need to talk. It's urgent. I hadn't spoken to him since the night of the dinner. He had been their golden child, the one they bet everything on. I should have ignored him. But curiosity has its own gravity, doesn't it? So I agreed to meet one last time. We met at an old cafe we used to go to as kids, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and nostalgia. He looked different, thinner, tired. Success had once fit him like a tailored suit, but now he looked like he was wearing someone else's shadow. You've done enough damage, he said as soon as we sat.
No greeting. No worms.
Just accusation. I sipped my coffee slowly. I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done to me, I replied. He leaned in, his voice low and bitter. You think you're the hero here, but you've turned into them, ruthless, calculating, obsessed with control. His words stung, mostly because there was truth buried in them. Revenge changes people. It sharpens the edges you once tried to soften. But I wasn't ready to admit that. Not yet. Then he dropped the bomb. Dad's company is under investigation, he said. And your name is tied to it. I frowned. What are you talking about? He slid a folder across the table. Confidential reports, contracts, transactions. My transactions. The ones I'd made under aliases. Somehow, he had them all. You were sloppy, he said coldly. The board wants to pin the financial discrepancies on you. You'll take the fall unless you walk away quietly. I stared at him, realizing what he was really saying. This wasn't about justice. It was about power again. He wanted me out of the picture, the same way they had done before, but this time under the pretense of damage control. The irony was bitter enough to taste. I smiled slowly. So, this is your version of a fancy dinner? I said. Same humiliation, different table. His jaw tightened. This isn't personal, Alyssa. I laughed, a hollow sound that turned a few heads in the cafe. Of course it is. It's always personal when it comes to family. I pushed the folder back toward him. Tell the board I'll handle my part. But you should know something, Mark. You're not half as smart as you think you are. I stood up, leaving him there with his self-righteous fury. As I walked out into the rain, my mind was already spinning. I had expected resistance, maybe even backlash, but not betrayal from the one person who had once held my hand when the world turned cruel. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I strategized. I went through every document, every file, and realized he wasn't lying. My aliases had indeed left traces. But what Mark didn't know was that those aliases were part of a larger safety net I'd built long ago. Every transaction led to shell companies that traced back to him. It wasn't intentional at first, just a way to protect my privacy, but now it became the perfect trap. He had tried to frame me, not realizing the breadcrumbs led right to his own doorstep. I smiled in the dark. Sometimes karma doesn't need help. It just needs a little direction. I contacted my lawyer, a calm, steel-eyed woman named Evelyn who had a knack for turning chaos into opportunity. "You've built an empire, Alyssa," she said. "It's time you start protecting it from emotional liabilities." Emotional liabilities. That's what my family had become. Within days, Evelyn had compiled a report, a clean, cold case showing how Mark had orchestrated fraudulent acquisitions through the companies he thought were mine. We didn't send it to the board. Not yet. Instead, I invited him and my parents for dinner.
My turn this time.
Same restaurant. Same chandeliers. Only this time, the laughter would sound different. They arrived dressed in their polished perfection, unaware of what was about to unfold. I had reserved the entire floor. My team sat discreetly in the background, lawyers, accountants, media advisors. Mark smirked as he sat down. "You really think you can fix this with another performance?" he said. I met his gaze steadily. "I don't perform," I said softly. "I reveal." I slid a folder across the table, mirroring his move from the cafe. "You wanted to frame me for fraud. The problem is, the trail you created circles back to you. Every cent, every contract. I didn't even have to plan it. You did it yourself." He froze, eyes darting across the pages. My father leaned in, confusion turning to alarm. "What is this?" he demanded. My mother's hand trembled. Mark's face drained of color as he realized what he was looking at, the perfect mirror of his own downfall. "You set me up," he whispered. "No," I said, leaning back. "You set yourself up. I just didn't stop you." My father slammed his hand on the table. "This family is tearing itself apart." I looked at him, calm and unflinching. "No, father. You tore it apart the night you taught us that love is conditional and loyalty is currency." The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother began to cry softly, whispering my name. I wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't. Not anymore. Compassion and closure don't coexist. When they finally left, the restaurant was silent again. I sat there, staring at the empty chairs, realizing the irony. I had gotten everything I thought I wanted: power, respect, independence. Yet all I felt was a hollow ache. Revenge doesn't heal. It just replaces pain with silence. I raised my glass and whispered to no one, to the family who taught me everything the hard way. That night, as news broke of Mark's suspension and my father's forced resignation from his own company, the internet called me ruthless, brilliant, unstoppable. But I didn't feel unstoppable. I felt tired. I looked out at the city that glittered with ambition and broken dreams, and for the first time, I wondered if maybe the real victory wasn't about revenge at all. Maybe it was about walking away before you become the very thing you fought against. But fate wasn't done with me yet, because just when I thought the story had ended, a letter arrived the next morning. A letter that would unravel everything I thought I knew about why I had been cut from the inheritance and who had really planned that dinner in the first place. The envelope was cream-colored, embossed with the family seal, a golden crest I hadn't seen since childhood. It lay on my doorstep like a ghost from another time, heavy with untold truths. I hesitated before opening it, my heart drumming against my ribs. The handwriting on the front wasn't my father's, nor my mother's. It was shaky, elegant, familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. When I finally tore it open, a faint scent of old paper and cologne escaped, the kind my grandfather used to wear. Inside was a single sheet of parchment and a small brass key. The letter began, "If you're reading this, Alyssa, then your revenge is complete, but your story isn't." My breath caught. It was from him, the man I'd adored as a child, the only one in my family who had ever seen me as more than a burden or a tool. My grandfather had died years ago, or so I thought. The letter continued, "I know what your father has done, what your brother has become, and what you had to do to survive. But there's something you were never told, something I hid from everyone to protect you. The key opens a safe in my old study. What you find there will explain why you were cut from the inheritance." My hands trembled as I read those words again and again. The world around me faded, the sound of rain outside, the hum of traffic. All that remained was the echo of his voice in my head. I had believed my revenge story was over, But apparently, the script had another act waiting. The safe was still where it had always been, behind a false wall in my grandfather's library at the old estate. I hadn't been back there since the will was read, since that humiliating dinner where my own blood turned me into a stranger. The mansion was empty now, quiet as a confession. Dust lay thick on the furniture. The once grand chandelier hung dim and lifeless. When I turned the key in the safe, a soft click echoed, followed by the metallic groan of old hinges. Inside were folders, photographs, and another envelope labeled for when she's ready. My pulse quickened. The first photo I pulled out nearly made me drop it, a picture of my father and a woman I didn't recognize. Young, smiling, holding hands. The back of the photo had a date, 1994. I wasn't even born yet. Beneath it was a birth certificate. My birth certificate. Except the name under father wasn't his. It was someone else's. A name I'd never seen before. I sank onto the dusty carpet, the walls closing in as realization set in. My grandfather's letter explained everything. My father had discovered, long ago, that I wasn't his biological daughter. My mother had confessed it during a rough patch in their marriage. My father had never forgiven her, and he'd never forgiven me. The inheritance, the exclusion, the public humiliation, it was all revenge, not for what I did, but for who I was. Tears blurred my vision as I read my grandfather's final words. You were punished for a sin you never committed. I tried to protect you, but by the time I found out, the damage was done. Your father's pride wouldn't allow him to love you, even though you were the best part of this family. The inheritance you lost is meaningless compared to the strength you've built. But if you want justice, true justice, use what's in the second folder. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside were legal documents transferring ownership of several hidden assets, properties, stocks, and accounts, all under my name. Assets my grandfather had quietly shielded from my father's reach. He had planned everything, down to the last detail, so that one day, when I discovered the truth, I would have the power to break free. For hours, I sat in silence, letting the truth sink in. My whole life, I had been fighting for validation from people who never saw me as theirs. Every victory, every act of revenge, it was all for the approval of a man who didn't even see me as his daughter. And now, staring at those papers, I realized how hollow that victory was. Revenge had given me power, but not peace. Justice had come, not from manipulation or payback, but from the truth buried beneath years of lies. I wasn't their mistake. I was their reminder of everything they'd tried to bury. When I finally walked out of the mansion, the sun was rising. The storm had passed, both outside and within. I looked up at the pale sky, a new calm washing over me. I didn't need the company anymore. I didn't need the inheritance. I had something far more powerful, closure. I drove to my mother's nursing home later that day, and when I sat by her bedside, I didn't bring up the letter or the truth. I simply held her hand and whispered, "I know." She wept silently, and for the first time in years, so did I. Weeks later, the media picked up on the scandal of my brother's fraud and my father's downfall. Reporters called me for interviews, documentaries, talk shows. I declined them all. I wasn't the woman who needed validation from strangers anymore. Instead, I started a foundation in my grandfather's name, one that offered scholarships to young women from broken families who wanted to build something for themselves. Outstanding Stories, I called it. Because sometimes, the best stories aren't about revenge, they're about rebirth. Months passed, and one evening, as I sat watching the city lights flicker like fading memories, a message popped up on my phone from an unknown number. It read, "You don't know me, but I think we share the same father." My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the screen, unsure whether to reply. The story that had begun as revenge now whispered of something deeper, connection, forgiveness, maybe even family. I typed slowly, "Let's talk." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anger. I felt peace. So, if you're watching this and you've ever been betrayed, humiliated, or pushed aside by the very people who are supposed to love you, listen to me. You can destroy yourself chasing revenge, or you can rise above and write a new ending. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and rate this story from 1 to 10 because I want to know, did this journey touch you the way it changed me? Don't forget to subscribe to Outstanding Stories for more powerful tales like this, because life's most extraordinary stories often begin with heartbreak and end with rebirth.